to our fall INMI program. So if you'll take your seats, grab your last cookie, your last cup of coffee for a little bit. We're going to have a stretch break, and by the way, get up and get those things during our presentation if you'd like. So I'm Rich Williams. I'm a board member of the Interfaith Network on Mental Illness, or INMI. And INMI's mission is to increase awareness and understanding of mental health in faith communities and in our wider communities. And for more about INMI, please pick up a brochure at the registration table. And let me cover the logistics today. So we've been able to get this room for an extra hour. Okay, so we will take some of that hour to allow you the program to go on for a few more minutes, and then to give you time to mingle with the panelists and have some more cookies and coffee. And since we've mentioned cookies and coffee, the restrooms are up the hall here. There is a restroom, and it's, if you go up the ramp, it's on the way over to the canyon side. So there's a fire exit, which is in the back of the room here, or go out the way that you came in. Both of those might work. Okay, and the cookies, we want to acknowledge Mindful Works for producing the cookies for us today. All right. So there are lots of cookies, no need to be shy. And there's lots of coffee as well. And water with cups. I think there's cups and water over by the cookies. And the coffee was provided by an anonymous donor. The sponsors of today's program have brought resources for you. They're on the tables on either side of the cookies, so while you're on the way to the cookies, pick up a brochure about an organization you'd like to know something about. And they're listed up here. I'm going to turn this off during the program, so memorize it now. And I'll read them to you. Atonement Lutheran Church is one of our sponsors today. Community United Church of Christ, Faith for All, First Congregational Church of Boulder, Hope Coalition, and Mental Health Partners, Rise Against Suicide, and we have a donor also, and that donor is the Parent Engagement Network. Each of these organizations have placed information here, so please pick them. One sponsor would like to share a couple of sentences about their organization's work, and if she would come or stand up and give her presentation. Okay, and this is Kathy Valentine.
Hi. It's been with the Hope Coalition for all of its time, which is about 20 years here in Boulder County, on depression awareness and suicide prevention if possible. So we do events, it's education-based, we do events yearly. The one that I want to bring your attention to is Hope Lights the Night. As it says on here, this is it doesn't even say which one it is, but it's been going on for about 12 years. And basically, it's a time to come together and remember those who have been lost to us by suicide. We have these over here, and there's also other materials from the Hope Coalition around warning signs, etc., of suicide, but mostly we focus on depression, because once you know what depression, what the signs are, you can help intervene with suicidal thoughts. I also want to talk briefly about the Parent Engagement Network, which has also been around in the Boulder County area. Both of these are grassroots organizations from Boulder County. Parent Engagement Network is just what it says. We're here to focus on parenting and help us, all of us who have been parents or caregivers of any kind for youth, and just to help us make sure that we know that we're not alone. So you can always access parentengagementnetwork.org to find out all of the events that we're sponsoring in the next couple of years. Thanks for having me and us here.
All right. Thank you, Kathy. We got two for the price of one now. So for our fall program today, we've asked some local mental health professionals to come and talk with us about the state of mental health in the greater Boulder area. And we'll be doing this in a talk show style. We'll be collecting questions from the audience as we go, okay? And we'll, if you need a card and a pen, question occurs to you, just raise your hand. We'll get a card and a pen to you. Okay, and we'll collect those if you hold it up in your hand, okay? And we'll address the questions toward the end of the program. And I'd like to introduce Marty McMahon, Reverend Marty McMahon. She's a retired senior pastor of the First Congregational Church, the United Church of Christ here in Boulder. All right, And Marty will take the program from here. Marty,
Thanks.
thank you.
Glad to see you all. Really glad you took time to be with us today. And it is my privilege to introduce you to our fabulous panelists. They each have specialties, and we're really delighted to have you. First is Mark INMI. And Mark specializes in working with adolescents and their families around stress, anxiety, depression, suicidal prevention for Boulder County, and his offices in Longmont and Louisville. And you will get to hear more from him and get his passion and his expertise in that area. And Karen Rice is the Chief Medical Officer of the Mental Health Partners in Boulder, this great organization that serves the underserved. And she has a passion for education, awareness, policy making on these big issues that affect mental health in not just our community, our whole state. She's very active in the state issues as well. She has a great practice of physical endurance, just came back from Kona in Hawaii on the Big Island, where she was one of the Iron Women.
Wow. People around here actually know what that is. I go home in Massachusetts, they're like, what?
And she lived to tell about it, so we're really happy. That's one of the most grueling of all Ironman events that there is. So welcome back.
Thank you. It's a little colder.
And Liz George is a therapist here in Boulder. Her office is in Boulder. And Liz has an interesting background as well. She was, for, 2 decades at CU. She's a clinical psychologist, and she was researching bipolar illness, particularly with teens. She wrote a book, co-authored The Bipolar Teen. Her practice now includes a lot of somatic work, like brain spotting and other somatic exercises and therapies that she has studied. And she is also an activist, and she weds her desire to be of service to those suffering with her activism and her meditation practice. A very interesting combination that I know you'll enjoy getting to know Liz better too. So the way we're going to do our format is we've had some informal discussions along with Rich, our organizer of the event, and each of our therapists has a particular question or two that they would like to speak to start us off. And if you hear anything that pricks an interest or further question you have, raise your hand. Don't, we're small, don't be afraid. And you'll get, Eric will give you a card and a pen, and he'll pass them on to me. But the first question I will ask each of the panelists to start us off. They each have their own particular one. So this is Mark's. Have you noticed that more young people are reporting depression and anxiety to the point that self-harm and suicide is a concern? And if that's true, why is the suicide risk so high in our community? Give us some thoughts on that.
Hi, everybody. So, yeah, I've been getting a lot of referrals, especially, I think, as you can understand, that the pandemic created a lot of isolation and social distancing. And many of my referrals are about parents that are worried about their kids, or kids that are telling their parents, I need to talk to somebody because I'm feeling sad, lonely, insecure. I don't know how to make friends. There's just a lot of angst in our middle schools, actually all the way down to elementary schools, middle schools and high schools, around how to connect with people. I think there's big interruption in how do you make a friend, how do you see your friends. So many kids are used to just talking to their friends online or on their phones, and they haven't really felt comfortable being face to face and trying to deal with social skills and how to read body language. And so I get a lot of kids that are referred to me that have social anxiety or just have plain anxiety being in crowds. I had one girl who got a special accommodation because the hallways were so crowded at her high school. Her teachers would let her leave for her next class 5 minutes early so she wouldn't be tousled around in the hallways. She said it was just terrifying to her. So I had never really thought of that as being, a source of anxiety or triggering event. But yeah, there's so many ways that kids can be affected and their mood can get very negative in today's world. I mean, there's so many ways that kids are afraid and anxious, and where they can also feel like they're not enough, and then they get into a ruminating way of negativity where their anxiety and depression, and often this depression can grow and grow and grow and they're alone. And so what I have found that works pretty well is doing what's called cognitive behavioral therapy, and then a variation of that called dialectical behavioral therapy, which are some ways of teaching mindfulness skills, how to do deep breathing, how to do some emotional regulation skills, self-soothing skills, distress tolerance skills, how to, express oneself. I sometimes find that just giving them tips around, if you want to get to know somebody, ask them some questions about what they like to do and listen to them, listen to what they want to do. Maybe there's something in common you might have, and you might find that you can, have some good conversations that way. I was talking to a girl just last week, and she moved here from California, and she's so certain that she's never going to be happy at her high school because people here are different. And, when I asked her, well, what do you mean by that? She said, well, they're just not like the kids that I went to school with. And so what I found is by having these conversations and having, a way to engage so that they feel comfortable and they learn to express themselves, they feel better understood. And when they feel better understood, they relax. They can finally feel, hey, maybe there's some solution here. And they can get out of that negativity that can plague them, when, especially in today's world, there's school shootings. I had to deal with a number of Marshall Fire families, and they had to deal with a lot of grief. And I can only imagine just how traumatic that is to reach for your favorite item of clothing and it's not there, or your favorite, things in your room and you don't have anything. They're all gone. And I had many, many conversations around grief and loss this year. There was the King Super shooting that affected a number of people, and they get triggered, often in school shooting, lockdowns at schools. How are you supposed to concentrate the rest of the day if you've been subjected to a lockdown at school? It's really tough. So there's a number of things that I think, in the zeitgeist of today's world that I'm dealing with. And I feel really fortunate and privileged to be in this position to have kids come and talk to me and learn how to express themselves. And you know, it's funny, I started working with high school students, and they would come in and say, my parents don't understand me. And in many cases, they're like wrestling with their identity issues. Like, they just don't understand. I have a different way of doing things. I have a different way of seeing things. And I can't talk to them about it. And so when they talk to me, and I'm an older person, and I accept them, and I'm non-judgmental, and I give them some tips around how, you know, maybe you don't raise your voice when you get mad at them, but you find a way to take a deep breath, and if you can't do that, take a break. You know, there are a number of techniques they can do to try to, you know, deal with their emotionality and their big feelings. And once they learn some of those skills, they learn to express themselves using I statements. I think that's like one of the most, I think, helpful ways to talk, is to talk about how do you feel and why, and what would you like to see instead. It's a simple little formula that I get them to practice, and when they can do that, all of a sudden their parents aren't so bad. You know, wow, you know, I can really have a conversation with them. And I found that that's happened at a younger and younger age. I started working with middle schoolers. Oh, my parents are so terrible, I can't stand them. And they're so mad and upset with them. And, you know, I give them a place to talk about their complaints. And then we just practice ways to express themselves instead of, you know, acting out and punching holes in the wall. Let's use your words. And I do that with elementary school kids too. And I have the real honor of working for Rise Against Suicide, because I feel very strongly about how the suicide rate is so high. It's number 2, it's the second leading cause of death for kids. It used to be number 1, so it's gone down a little bit, but now number 1, I think, is accidents and violence, which isn't, you know, wonderful. But, you know, I would say that the Rise Against Suicide provides no-cost therapy to kids in schools, and I want to see the suicide rate go down, and I'm very passionate about seeing suicide prevention be supported in this community, and to find other ways to resource these kids when they do get overwhelmed and they need, you know, like maybe some intensive outpatient therapy, or they need an inpatient stay. Colorado is way behind in our inpatient beds, and I don't know if you know that, but we got to expand our access to all these depressed and anxious kids. So why is our suicide rate so high? Well, there's a lot of theories, but you know, the one that I guess I would see is that, you know, when you're not feeling good inside and you just feel like you're not enough and that nothing is going right, and you tell yourself these negative thoughts all day long, and by the way, they can be milliseconds. You can have 2 negative thoughts every second for the first minute you're awake, and no wonder you want to pull the covers over your head. That's 120 negative thoughts. These kids, you know, have to find a way to dispute those negative thoughts and find a way to see some of the positives. And when they can do that, you know, it helps. But what happens with them, I think, is that they compare their insides with other people's outsides. And they see their friends having so much fun at lunch. Or, you know, they're online and they see all these parties and they're not invited. And they think, oh, I'm not enough. And they feel rejected and they feel left out. And that's, I think, one of the biggest triggers, I think, for kids. They want to feel included. And this thing around social media, I can talk about that later, is, like, I think a big factor around generating anxiety and depression. But it also can help with kids saying, hey, I don't feel good, and talking to their friends, and maybe their friends will call up Safe to Tell. I don't know if you know what Safe to Tell is, but sometimes those kids need a welfare check, and they can get some direct intervention that way. So I've talked long enough, but thank you for having me here.
Can I just give you a follow-up question on that? The kids that come to you, you went all the way from elementary through high school. Are they referred by parents, schools, welfare checks? I mean, how do you see most of your clients?
So most of my referrals, I think, come from seeing me online. Like I have, you know, a web page, and you know, people just Google, how do I get a child therapist or, you know, a teenage therapist? How do I get a therapist that works with depression and anxiety?
But parents mainly?
And parents will do that. Often I get referrals through their insurance provider lists. So I take insurance, and they often go to their insurance and say, I need to find a therapist for my teenager or my college student,
Okay.
who's included in our network. And there's a network list. Now, those lists sometimes get out of date, but when they do find me, then it's a question of, do I have some availability, right? But I get also referrals through the Rise Against Suicide program through the schools. I get word of mouth referrals. I love word of mouth referrals. So I'm going to just give you a little quick idea of how I got a bunch of referrals, because I was working with some kids that were in marching band. And the marching band kids have moms get really involved in marching band, and those moms talk to each other, and then when their kid isn't doing well, the moms say, well, go to Mark. And I get a referral like that, and I'm going, wow, I feel really honored and privileged, right? So for a while there, I was like an expert on marching bands.
I was thinking about how I was when I was a teenager. If my parents decided I needed to see a therapist, I just wonder how they are when they come to you. Is there a lot of resistance?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I would say, you know, when somebody's miserable, they are almost desperate to get some help. And, you know, when they come in with that kind of willingness to see what might happen, then I try to engage with them and tell them, you know, what to expect. And I try to be a good listener. And I try not to give too much advice right away, but, you know, I have to stop myself sometimes, because I do want to give advice, especially when I see them, you know, doing these things that, you know, add to their despair. But sometimes I get kids that don't want to be there. And, you know, I do what's called motivational interviewing, and I say, well, okay, well, you know, you don't have to, you know, show up here if you think you can handle these things on your own. I say, what would happen if you did feel better? What would that look like? And get them to imagine things getting better. And getting that and telling them some stories around how I have seen some progress, slow but sure, around how mood can improve, and, you know, how they can maybe feel understood by their parents. You know, they really do, like, respond to that. Oh, my teachers are so terrible, they don't understand me, you know. All of the adults in their lives seem to be so distant and unavailable to them, but when they can feel like they can use their words and express themselves better, and then get some real, like, acknowledgement and some validation, that's a big necessity for our kids, getting validated. They get so, you know, invalidated so much that when they do get validated, hey, I think I'll go back, you know?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Let's go to Karen next, Dr. Karen Rice. And what are you seeing as Chief Medical Officer of our partners here?
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm seeing is a lot of need out there. I think, you know, for so long, mental health and substance use has had a stigma around talking about it. It still does, but people are definitely talking about it more. I think COVID just kind of, not necessarily amplified the problem, but really just put it more under the microscope. You know, some of the social issues we have, the inequities we have in our society just really were unmasked by COVID. And, you know, I think in some ways, we always, in society, sometimes our greatest adversities becomes our greatest, you know, times to move on and advance. So there's this hope that maybe COVID kind of just exposed all these things, and now we have an opportunity to really look at our mental health systems and how we prioritize that in our society. And you know, we live in this county, Boulder County, at least in my world, where I'm mostly seeing Medicaid patients. Medicaid, if you don't know, is the public health insurance for people. So the amount of money that we get is based on state politics and also county politics. And you know, we are lucky. I previously worked at in another county in Colorado, very different than Boulder County. But we are very lucky in this county to have taxpayers that want to spend their tax dollars on social services, on mental health. So we live in a very unique place in that way. And I think at one point not long ago, there's 17 community mental health centers in the state of Colorado. I believe our mental health center gets, and we also work with Broomfield, but our mental health center gets more county dollars from our area than all the others combined. So, you know, that's great, right? And I also think, you know, to some degree that leads to some, I'd say they're good problems to have. I think a lot of people want to try to fix things, and that's everyone's heart is in the right place. But I think that also leads to some patchwork stuff. A lot of people doing redundant work and so on. So I think right now the county's really working on this roadmap to behavioral health. Mental health partners has been part of that. You know, we have kind of our things that we're doing. There were a lot of grants that came out of the pandemic. There's some grant money from the opioid settlement in terms of you know, investing in substance use treatment. So there's a lot at play, and I think you know, overall, when you think of the whole scheme of healthcare, mental health is just still crumbs in terms of the money it gets. But we actually have more money in our system than we ever have for mental health. Again, emphasizing we need so much more, but still, it's more than we've ever had, to the point where, you know, there are some grants out there. It's like we want them, but we can't apply because we don't have the workforce to fulfill the grants. So, you know, now workforce has always been a challenge in mental health as well, in part because of the way insurance is reimbursed. It's hard to make a living in mental health. This is why you see a lot of people going into private practice. You know, if a psychiatrist were to just take Medicaid, they could see patients literally 24/7 and not have like a regular salary. So it's pretty significant. But, you know, so that kind of all plays into like how do we prioritize mental health? Like what does our healthcare system say about mental health? And that's always, you know, the money is where the priorities are. So that's an important thing. But, you know, workforce, I think just also a lot of the workforce, at least in psychiatry, is closer to retirement than graduating from school. And we have a workforce shortage in psychiatry. And now, you know, there's just so much more need. And we've had a lot of, you know, we have many licensed providers that are also capable of providing these services, which is great. And, you know, I think there's other ways we can address the workforce shortage, but I'll probably stop there with your question. So
We got the big picture.
the big picture. You want me to get into big picture stuff?
Well, that's kind of the lay of the land.
Yes,
that we're seeing,
yes.
But we will definitely follow up with getting you down in the weeds there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I am curious.
Mm-hmm.
when you look at the big picture of mental health partners, is there one or two things that are like, yeah, I'm seeing that and I'm seeing that over and over again?
Well, kind of along the lines of people talking about it now and mental health becoming in the really just becoming in everyone's awareness. I very much love to be, one of the faces of mental health partners in the community, and I want to be that go-to person for all things psychiatry in Boulder County. Like, that's fantastic, and we love helping people. But the reality is, there's so much work to be done. There is so much that goes beyond what we just do in providing mental health care, that we need everybody. And there's the saying that, well, do you want me to go into social determinants now, or just kind of wait on that one?
Go for it.
Okay. So there's kind of this saying that your zip code matters more than your genetic code, and it massively different. And I don't know if people have heard of social determinants of health. Have people heard that term before? So really, it boils down to it, 80% of health issues are not related to the actual health care you receive. So 20% of your health really depends upon the health care you are receiving. So where is that 80%? And this is where I'm going back to, well, mental health partners could be 20%, but all these other things are the 80%. And that's why when we do kind of feel this overwhelm in the community, and I mean, everyone's feeling it, it's, on the one hand, very overwhelming because there's so much to be done and so many things that play into mental health in ways that, a lot of things play into other disciplines in medicine in terms of social determinants, but mental health, it's even more so. So if you're actually gonna help someone's mental health, you have to get so many areas of their life kind of on track, whether it be housing, their education, their vocational stuff, their family connectedness. Are they, dysfunctional families because of racial inequities, job sexism, wage inequality, all of these things. So that's kind of where, we need to look, and that's the empowering part of the message, is that all of us can do things to help the mental health, and we have to look way upstream. Then just by the time they get the mental health issues, you're way beyond prevention. And even underlying those social determinants, societies don't just come to be. There are politics that create societies. So that's what we now refer to as the political determinants of health. And that kind of boils down to your government, your policy, and your voting. And a lot of this gerrymandering, who votes, who puts people in power, those people then decide these important things like what housing development goes here or there, and then, can you afford to live in this place, and this place may be a very unhealthy environment. So it really, at the end of the day, by the time I'm involved, it's so far down the road. And we have to, as our community, realize how many of the things we all do in our day-to-day lives as community members impact people's mental health.
Wow, yeah. Ooh, big message. We'll digest that a little bit here. Take a deep breath.
That's why we go to her.
No, yes, this is true.
Now can we do a little brain spotting?
We're about to do something
I have a
good,
little
I can tell you.
exercise for everybody, myself included, because I'm like,
Yeah. Liz always has a little somatic thing we can do. But first I want to hear what you're seeing. We hear the adolescent anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. We hear the systemic, huge problems leading up to what mental health partners has to deal with. Not even 20%, right?
yeah.
What are you seeing in your practice?
Yeah, so I am seeing what people are calling anxiety. So I feel like a lot of people are talking about how anxious they are, and I'm really trying to shift that to talk about overwhelm. I mean, certainly there's anxiety and there are anxiety disorders, but I think that a lot of what people are experiencing is what I would call overwhelm. There is a lot going on with climate anxiety, a lot of issues around social justice that are really distressing for people. We have wars, there's political and religious divisiveness. A lot of the things that Mark talked about as far as social media and the isolation, which I might be able to talk about a little bit later, and then just the real inequities that Karen was mentioning. And so the way that I work with that is I try to work with, yes, these things are outside of us and we may not be able to control them and we're not going to negate that they exist. How do we work with our own nervous system to be able to manage that?
How do you?
Well, I am happy to provide a practice.
Yeah, that was good.
So this might seem elemental to some of you. I think a lot of you are in the mental health field, and I hope that you'll, just kind of practice along with me, because I think we can all continue to practice. But I usually talk about the polyvagal model with people, and I talk about being in ventral vagal, which is being in that kind of rest and digest, that sense of safety and connection. And then I talk about the sympathetic arousal, which is more the fight or flight, where we might feel anxiety, we might feel irritation, or in dorsal, which is more that collapse, which I think a lot of people felt during the pandemic. We might feel kind of hopeless and disconnected and shut down. And so what I'd like to do is talk about the different story that our body and our minds tell when we're in each of those different stages. And so I'd like to lead you through a little practice. Those of you who are open to doing this, thank you. Those of you who don't want to do it, it's completely invitational, as all somatic work is. Please just, listen along and you can make your own, think about whatever you want to think about. So if it's possible and you feel open to it, maybe putting your feet on the floor and having your seat in the chair and really feeling the support of your chair, feeling the back of your chair. Just letting your body kind of settle and relax in. If you want, you can close your eyes or have a soft gaze. You just don't want to be distracted by anything around you, so you can go in. And as you're sitting here, just notice your breath, and maybe notice your breath where it's easiest to feel. It could be at your nostrils, it could be at your chest, it could be at your belly. And this is a way that we just easily come back into a sense of groundedness. It's really this simple to just come back to ourselves. You might even start to feel a little bit of tension releasing. You might start to feel your nervous system settling just a little bit, like mine is. And so from this place of being a little bit more grounded, I'm going to have us work through some different experiences of the nervous system. So what I would like for you to do is imagine a situation that's occurred in the last few days. It might even be something that happened today that was challenging. It might be a person in your life or a situation, it might be an event. And again, please choose something that isn't too distressing. Just has a little bit of a feel like, ugh, that was hard, but not something that feels really, really challenging. And so now take that topic, and we're going to go to that sympathetic place of feeling anxious or frustrated about it, what we might call fight or flight. As you feel into the sympathetic arousal of this, you might feel a flood of energy. And as you look at this situation and this energy, what's the story in this state? What is your body telling you? Is there constriction or tension or heat? What's your mind saying? You might be having fearful or angry thoughts. What are the impulses that go with this? Your hands might clench, your feet may lift off the floor. This is your sympathetic nervous system acting to protect you, and this is its story. Now I want you, if you can, to just put that aside for a moment, and keeping the same situation in mind, let's drop into the dorsal system, the place of hopelessness, collapse, or disconnect. And if you just dip a toe into this draining energy, what's the story here? Again, notice what your body's doing. It might feel heavy. You might have taken a bit of a hunched posture. Notice your thoughts. You may be thinking, it isn't worth it. Why bother? Maybe I should just give up. And what are the emotions? You might despair, for hopelessness. These are common experiences in the dorsal state, and this is the body and mind's dorsal story. And now again, if you can, just put that story to the side, and we're going to grab an anchor of the ventral vagal response. Find that place in relation to this situation where you feel organized enough, a sense of relative safety, a sense of regulation and resilience in the face of this situation. In this place, what is the story? How is your body? It might feel a little bit more relaxed and present, a little bit more grounded. You might notice that your thoughts are imagining ways to handle the situation. You might be thinking of some solutions or some soothing messages around the situation if it can't be solved. And how do you feel? You might have some energy around this now, feeling like you aren't so weighed down and that you might be able to do something about it. And this is your body's ventral vagal story. So if you'd like, you can let go of all of the situations and kind of come back to the room in whatever way you'd like. You can kind of start looking around and letting your body move. And just noticing that this is the same situation, but these are 3 different stories. And we can feel really different depending on what story we go to. And our brain is hardwired to create story. The thing is that most stories that we create, we've created them. I mean, everybody has a different story and we can create different stories. So it might be helpful to always think, what is the story I'm creating? How is it impacting my body? Is this helping me to feel a little bit better about the situation or a little bit worse about the situation? And I find just in helping people start to notice, oh, this is my body that's reacting to things, they have a little bit more of a sense of being able to choose how to respond. I have a quote by Viktor Frankl that I'd like to read. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And so if we can pause in that space and we can settle into ourselves, the best versions of ourselves, and give ourselves the best chance to respond in a way that's going to be positive and feel a sense of connection and safety, and I think that we actually give that to anyone that we are in contact with. And so I think it would be nice, maybe just for the rest of our talk, to keep checking in with yourself and see where your physiology is and remembering the way of coming back.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's really helpful. As we just fall right into the response without noticing, naming, and then I would say nurturing or nourishing a different response, should we want one. I mean, we could stay hunched over and in despair if we want.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
And
it's really
sometimes
good
that
to know you have a
happens.
choice. And I like that you brought us back to our body's wisdom telling us to. So, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah. So remember, you get to ask questions, but we want you to tell Eric you need a card to write them on, or Rich, behind you, okay? Raise your hand, they'll be ready. Because I have another question for each person. But we'd like you to be able to interact with us. So Mark's next question, he touched on it and said he would talk about it a little bit more, and it relates to this question. How does technology and screen time affect young people in your practice negatively? And what are some of the ways that this shows up in your practice with clients?
Okay, well, as you might imagine, not just kids, but adults are on their phones a lot. And I notice that when I get a new teenager or middle schooler, you know, I often want to hear from the parents whether they have any family rules around screen time. because I think every family really needs to develop this. There needs to be some screen time rules at home, and that the parents follow them themselves. Many times, parents model, being out of control with answering emails or being on their laptops or on their phones, well past bedtime or early in the morning, or sometimes just neglecting having a conversation with their kids. And when kids see that, then they think, oh, I guess, I'm supposed to be on my device. And so what I noticed, though, is that there are a lot of habits that can be developed, and some of them are good habits and some of them are not very helpful and can be actually detrimental to their mental health, right? So what are some of the risk factors? Well, I find that when kids are on social media, and there's been some research that backs this up, if they're on like Instagram more than 30 minutes a day, they're going to get depressed. And the reason that depression seems to be connected to that is that they're constantly worried about whether they're lovable or they're accepted or their friends care about them. And, I see that Screenagers is coming up with a new movie. I would recommend all of you to see the Screenagers movies, because what we find is that it's not just these social media apps that are the cause of this, but just kids communicating through some kind of texting app like Snapchat or Discord, or just messaging through their provider. So I was talking to some kids, and they say, oh, I have a lot of friends. And I said, well, when do you get together? And, oh, I see them every day when we get online and we play video games, right? And that's their social interaction for that day, and sometimes for their entire week. They don't even spend time together. This is really concerning to me, because as I mentioned earlier, they need to learn some social skills. They need to have some FaceTime, and not just the FaceTime on their iPhone, right? But they need to spend some time playing and being outside, being outdoors. And so what I guess what I see around technology is that it can be excessive. And when kids are isolating in their room and they're playing video games, or they're on YouTube, a lot of kids just watch one little YouTube over, they can do it for hours. They can really waste a lot of time. And then I'm worried about YouTube and what the algorithm is recommending to them. There was one, a research example of where a girl was asking Google for some advice, search for a diet, and YouTube all of a sudden recommended a bunch of things about anorexia. And all of a sudden, this teenage girl started learning about anorexia and bulimia, and that didn't help her situation around diet. It started to show her some other examples of dysfunctional ways to maintain her weight, or ways that were really harmful. So, there are these algorithms I worry about, and kids being on their phones, pretty much the majority of their free time really worries me. And do you all know what FOMO is? The fear of missing out. This is constantly reinforced. And I know a lot of adults that go through FOMO, but when you're trying to belong to a group and you have some friends and you have one friendship group that is leaving you out of a activity or a party that they are all showing online, you start to feel rejected and you're not enough. And that can have real repercussions around their mood and their sense of identity, and where they might feel like, suicidal ideation is going to take place. So this kind of social anxiety and depression can be manifested through smartphones. There was a father of some young boys. He had twins, and they were 10 years old, and he gave them smartphones, and all of a sudden he didn't talk to them for a week, and he took them back, he took the phones back from them, and he decided, I'm gonna ask my legislators to have a minimum age requirement on these smartphones, right? I think that might even be a good idea. I don't think that young kids should be given smartphones, because they can also get on websites where they're looking at, X-rated material like porn sites, and then they think that that's sex education. All right, I have to have a lot of talks with young men, and let them know that's not sex education. That's not, how people are having sex. A lot of boys told me, "Oh my God, are my parents acting that way?" They were like, some of them are actually troubled by that, right?
What have you found helps? You said helping parents get a plan for time. What else would help in your direct contact with a young person around their use of screens?
Well, when you have a conversation about, being on their phones or on their laptops or gaming, a lot of kids they will not make any apologies for their video gaming. They're very proud of how good they are on these games. They even rank themselves. And so I'll have a real conversation about how that could be fun and it could be meaningful to them. But I also want them to get sleep. I want them to go to bed and not stay up past midnight or 1 o'clock. And many of these kids are staying up. So I talk to parents, I talk to kids. Let's have, time where you turn off your devices. Many families will institute turn in your iPads and your phones and put them on their chargers until tomorrow morning. I want you to get a good night's sleep, or I don't want you being on your phone while, and many of these kids, I'm doing my homework, right? Make sure they're doing their homework. And so parents have to get involved. They can't just hope that and cross their fingers that, kids are using their devices responsibly. They need to enforce the rules if they have one. And sometimes kids will freak out if they lose access to their phone. And I have to coach parents, this is a loving thing to do. You have to sometimes do that and have some boundaries around that, and really enforce your limits so that they're not getting excessive. And it can seem addictive, So, there's also some good things that can happen around, access to the internet. And I don't want it all seem like some, doom and gloom. But I do think that it needs to be monitored, and that there needs to be some rules around it in order for good mental health to take place at home and at school. I'll mention one other thing that I learned yesterday. I thought the teachers all would take the phones away if they caught kids playing games in class. And I found out they don't do that anymore. They just tell them, turn that off. They'll even allow them to put games on their school iPads they give out. And I thought that was also a rule they weren't doing.
This big picture, wherever you want to go with what you feel is important to you to say. How about that?
I think I covered a lot of the things, which is the main message I have for the audience is that we all have things we can do to improve the mental health of our community, and it doesn't just have to be the community mental health center. And I think just the fact that you're all here shows that you have interest in these topics. I know when I started getting more interested in policymaking at the state level, for example, I was one of the few psychiatrists there, and I'm like, well, don't you want to ask that psychiatrist? Like, they know way more about this than I do. But the reality is, like, you have your voice and the knowledge, and we all have our things that we are expert in, and we shouldn't worry that we're not doing it good enough. Just being advocates, I think, goes a long way. So, get yourself out there. That's kind of how all this started for me, and I've been in Colorado now for 10 years, and one door opens the other, opens the other. So, if you have interest in these areas, you want to do things in the community that pertain to mental health, we need allies, and you'd be surprised. I think, I'm just surprised at what I've been able to do just because I'm the one that volunteers. So that's really my message for people.
Is it harder now because of the polarization politically in the country?
I think it's hard in terms of we're trying to make progress, and there's a lot of politics that get in the way of progress. And I think, when we have so much need right now, what we're choosing to focus on, whether it be the city council, the county, the state, the feds, I think that it's, when we have these very big problems to deal with, we need to use our energy efficiently, and I fear that a lot of that is just, not the priority right now.
Liz, I heard you say before, isolation is something you're seeing a lot of. Would you like to talk a little more about that and, its root causes and what's working in your practice to help people with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Vivek Murthy. He was the 19th and 21st Surgeon General. And he said that there was a crisis of loneliness, isolation, and lack of connection in our country. Even before COVID, half of the population felt that at the time. And I just took some notes here so that I could remember, but disconnection fundamentally affects our mental, physical, and societal health. And lacking connection can increase the risk for premature death to levels comparable to smoking daily. So it really does impact us. And the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Dr. Murthy, has laid out a framework for a national strategy to advance social connection, which has never been implemented before. And if you go onto their website, you can see the PDF of it, and it's really exciting. So I just wanted to say that, I've seen isolation ongoing, but the pandemic certainly didn't help. I think that there are two elements that I want to talk about when it comes to isolation, ways that I help people. There are the very practical ways of connecting, there are, like you were saying, downsides to the phone and upsides to the phone. So, there are apps that people can get on where they can meet people and make friends with people. I have a lot of clients, especially over the pandemic, where they had to move to different cities because of family, or people were living in New York and didn't feel safe there. And I think it's called Bumble, is an app where you can Bumble BFF and you can find people to become friends with. There are all sorts of groups that people can join. I know there were more before the pandemic. I think that there are more that are coming back, but I just have seen when people can access community, it really does make a big difference. So I can certainly talk more about that. I feel like we probably all have a sense of what that looks like. I want to talk a little bit more, though, as a mental health professional about what I see more than that, which is people's ability to feel connected. You hear oftentimes that people can be surrounded by people and still feel alone or still feel disconnected. And that's the piece that I feel like I work most with in my practice. Certainly I have those clients where I get them hooked up with different groups, and within a couple months they aren't seeing me anymore because they're feeling great. But most of the time I feel like it's because people really can't feel into that connection. And so one of the things that I think impacts that is related to our nervous system, which I talked about before, and now you all have the lay of the land as far as that's concerned. So when we're in a threat response, that's our limbic system, and it's very hard for us to feel connected to people when we're in that response. So not only is it good to not be in that response because it's really hard on our bodies and our health, and other people can feel it, but it also makes it really hard for us to connect with other people. And so if there are any strategies that people have on an ongoing basis around safety and connection, oftentimes part of that can be compassion and connecting with oneself and then connecting with others. The other thing that I think gets in the way is our attachment system, which more and more people have been talking about attachment. Now, people have a little bit more of an anxious attachment. It's hard for them to feel connection coming in. So they might have a friend that says, oh, I really care for you, but they have a hard time feeling that. For people who have avoidant attachment, they have a hard time realizing that they actually want connection. So it may be really hard for them to sense into, oh, you know, I do actually want connection with people. And then if people have a more disorganized attachment, it's really hard for them to feel safe and connected at the same time because maybe they had some abuse as a child or relational trauma. And so if I want to connect, I don't feel safe, or to feel safe, I'm not connected. And so different strategies as far as being able to work with those elements are the ones that I work with. And again, I'm going to just look at my notes a little bit because I have another practice that I want to lead us through. One of the things that I do a lot with people is have them work with the image channel for their imagination. And so right now, I just want you to think about a little exercise, imagination exercise. So I want you to imagine that I have a lemon, and I'm going to cut it in half, and it's really juicy. You can start to smell the citrus. And I want you to imagine that I'm going to put that lemon right on your tongue, and start to notice what happens. You might start to feel a little pucker. You might start to go, I know when my kids were little, we would bite into lemons, and then we'd take pictures of each other because our faces looked so funny. But we actually, 70% of what we imagine, the brain and body thinks is actually happening. And if you think of how much we're exposed to stress and the news and trauma and fear and scarcity, and if that's going on in our brain and our body, that's what we think is happening. And so then again, it's really hard for us to connect. And so I'm going to have you do another exercise with your imagination. And again, maybe just come into a little bit of a grounded space like we did before. I'm not going to have you do the full groundedness. And what I'd like for you to do is to just bring to mind someone. It could be a being, it could be a deity, it could be a more than human being, like an animal, a pet, it could be nature. But something that you feel connected to. And just notice as you bring that in what starts to happen. And you might start with just one. There might be one person or being or element of nature. And then now bring in a second. See if someone, something wants to join. And just start to notice what happens to your nervous system. You might start to feel a little more relaxed, a little more connected. And I'm going to have you pause there. But oftentimes what I do is I have people bring in another person or element and another person or element, and we create what's called an ally oasis. And this is a term that Diane Poole-Heller coined. She does a lot of attachment work, and I've been trained in her work. And so if we can just bring to mind our ally oasis, I did that before I came in today because I knew I was going to be a little bit anxious, and I started to think of all the people who I know who care for me, who were excited knowing that I was going to do this today. And I brought in all the people. Alan has had me give a couple talks in the past, and remembering how nice that was and how well those have gone. So we can do that, regularly for ourselves and for our clients. And then the final way that I think is really important, and there are a couple of different ways you can do this, is just those casual connections that we have with people. Some research has shown that people who have more acquaintances are happier. And even just having a moment with someone. I was hiking yesterday, and there was a woman I passed asked her, and she just was in awe, and she said, "Do you live here?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And she said, "You're so lucky." She said, "I'm from Arkansas, and I'm just visiting here, and it's so amazing." And I was like, "Yes, it's so amazing." And the rest of the talk, the rest of my walk, I felt so excited and just grateful for being here. And so I do this exercise, and you may try it when you leave. When I'm walking past people, I do what I call the ping exercise. And so I look at them and I send from my heart to their heart a little ping. And I just see what happens. And some people, kind of ping me back. And some people just look at me, and some people get a little hostile, and some people ignore me, and some people I notice are pinging me before I even get to them. But when we notice, people in our world aren't scary. They're okay. Most people are pretty nice. When I'm at the airport, I notice how well things go instead of the one guy who's screaming at somebody because he's upset about something. I think, most of us do pretty well most of the time, and then that helps us feel more safe and more connected. So, these are just daily practices of being able to connect and being able to feel the connection so that we have less of a sense of isolation.
Nice, thank you. We have questions. Our idea was to go for a whole hour, which we almost have, and stretch, get a cookie if you wanted, and then take these questions then. Do you think we should do that?
Yeah,
Does that sound good? We're ready for a stretch?
Do a little stretch.
Little
and stand up.
coffee, cookie. Don't go far away. We'll be back. Well, it could be 45, 15, or 75 years. I think I'm going for 15. Over the last 15 years, that my therapy involves more and more spiritual questions from my clients. They're hungry for spiritual awareness beyond psychological issues. Is that your experience? That's for anybody who would like to answer that. Go, Liz.
I can say, part of somatic work that I love is really the transformational aspect of it. So when people are doing somatic work, they're able to connect with parts of themselves that really are part of that greater self. I think Dick Schwartz calls it the self with a capital S, if you're familiar with family systems therapy. Not family systems, internal family systems therapy. And so I notice that there's such an expansiveness that happens in working with the body, and people really are hungry for it. I think also because of the strife and the struggle, people are trying harder to figure out some sort of meaning to life. If all we get is what's on the news and that's all there is, well, how do I feel good going day to day? And so I think that larger connection with some greater meaning is really important for people as well. So I'll just say that for everybody.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So, there's a small leap between meditation and sometimes kids bringing up prayer, if they want to bring that up, and that's something that gives them, some solace or some serenity or some sense of like having a higher power. I don't mind talking about that in the room, and I find it actually kind of refreshing because it gives a conversation to like a larger sense of belonging, and being able to see the world not just with themselves, but how they're included with others. So I kind of hope for those opportunities sometimes.
Belonging seems to be a big theme. I know for Jed, my psychiatrist friend, belonging was always a really big thing whenever I heard you talk, right? About mental health, that sense of belonging. So you're talking belonging to oneself, belonging to community, belonging to a greater purpose, or being, or something. The greater something, we could call it, right? Yeah, great. Here's a general question also. Are you finding amongst the greater anxiety that you've mentioned, both Liz and Mark mentioned, the heightened anxiety among us, or the overwhelm, to use your word. Are you finding more diagnosis of neurodiversity?
Yeah. I don't know, do you want to?
Well, so neurodiversity would be, in my mind, do I see more kids with sensory processing disorder, PANS, autism spectrum disorder. I see a lot of kids that have ASD, being on the spectrum, and that being part of, their challenge is they can't read social cues or body language that easily. So we'll practice and we'll talk about that. But yeah, I see kids with, many other kind of, conditions that can also hinder their sense of belonging or happiness, and where they feel that they can't connect as easily as they would like. And sometimes they have some awareness to that, and sometimes they don't.
Mm-hmm. And you've been a therapist for many decades. Are you finding more of that now? More neurodiversity? Or is it there's more awareness, there's more
I don't know, there's
spectrum?
more of it. I think there's more awareness.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
Right.
Yeah.
I think people are a lot more aware. One of the unofficial diagnoses that I get a lot of is my child is a highly sensitive person. And that's not in the DSM-5, all right? It's not a real diagnosis that, we use medically or, with the usual conversation of treatment. But what does that mean? And I do think that there is a lot more openness to talk about how some people are extroverts and they like to talk and they get energy from social situations. And that's highly prized in our culture. But there's a great book called Quiet, and it's about the power of introverts. And I bring that up with a lot of my clients. It's really great that you're, not always talking all the time. And that when you do have an opinion, people lean in and hear it, right? And so when kids learn about those different ways of temperament, of, I find myself, I would call myself, omnivert, because there are times after a long day of talking in my office, I need to recharge my battery and be alone, right? I really do need that time.
Ambivert, I think it's.
Ambivert, yeah.
We were thinking of omnivore, maybe you're one of those too.
Omnivert, yeah. So anyway, I would say that neurodiversity is something that I'm more aware of, and I think a lot more people in the community are too.
I was wondering about over pathologizing as a tendency now. I don't know if that's the right word, but I liked what both you and Liz were saying about normalizing for people behaviors that are just different, but different doesn't mean deficient, nor does it mean pathological. But I don't know what you're finding with this labeling sort of thing.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I feel like, I don't know, it does feel like it's been over the pandemic, for whatever reason, I just have so many more clients that are aware that they're on the autism spectrum, or they have ADD, or they have verbal processing or slow processing kinds of things. And I've started kind of talking about it from the perspective that I think we all probably have some form of neurodivergence. I mean, I know I do. I don't fit in sometimes. I say the wrong thing. I do the wrong thing. I don't know what the rules are. I don't have the script. I don't have that sense of belonging, But I mean, I don't have a neurodivergent way of being in the world that impacts me a lot. You know, somebody might think, oh, it's kind of weird that she said that, but I don't feel out of step. So I always try to say, you know, there is a way that neurodivergence shows up that really does impact people's lives, and I would never want to take away from that. And I just want to normalize more of that sense that we're each unique. I was reading about how if each seed for an apple tree was allowed to just develop naturally, every single apple would look differently, would taste different, it would have a different texture, but we engineer them to get the Granny Smiths or the Honey Crisps or the whatever they are. And I kind of feel that way about people. And when I talk to my clients of color, or I talk to my non-binary and transgender clients, we talk about why do every tree is different, every tree is unique. We don't think every tree should look like the other trees. Why do people think that we should all look the same and be the same and behave the same? And so I think that I love this generation that's coming up right now, I think is giving us permission to step outside of that box that I felt so constrained by, being a 56-year-old woman that was raised in the South, you know? And so, yeah, I agree with you. You know, let's let people who want to identify and get services, I mean, that's important. And let us just all be our own unique, full beings, messing up and being kooky and, you know, whatever it might be.
Well said. If a diagnosis helps you get a treatment that helps your life be better, I'm for it.
Mhm.
But just labeling is not so helpful. So you put that together nicely for us. Thank you. So I gave them cards that you gave them. Take it away, Liz. Karen got the most cards. So we're going
Lots of systems, political questions. That's why they asked me to be on this.
It's Boulder.
I love the enthusiasm. Okay. So, you know, basically what can we do to help? How do we help? There's kind of a common theme in these. What politically can we do as citizens to support mental health? I'll say right now up in Larimer County, they have a tax initiative. It's a tax that all the money, it's a sales, I think it's part of the sales tax. All the money that comes off of that, they're using for behavioral health. And the county, Larimer County, owns this beautiful piece of land, which is kind of right out by the landfill, ironically, that they donated to kind of Summit Stone, which is the mental health partners equivalent up in Larimer County. They donated that money to Summit Stone, but you know, kind of as a partnership with the county. So they built this, and it's almost done. It's beautiful. This beautiful $65 million facility. It's going to house all these acute care, you know, kind of acute psych stuff, like urgent care, inpatient stuff, detox, or I'm sorry, withdrawal management, kind of these partial hospital programs, just really everything. And eventually, they're hoping to develop kind of a campus where there's housing for some people, transitional housing. So you know that it's great that they have them, and Larimer County's going to have. You know, it was described to me as if you took the building and turned it upside down, like Larimer County owns all like the stuff that wouldn't fall to the bottom, but then the staffing is more what Summit Stone is doing. Anyway, so this all came from a tax initiative, and there has been talk, and I really think, I'm hoping we have the political window now that this tax initiative is going to eventually get on the ballot here in Boulder. And you know, that would be a great way for people to support it. I think what's most important about the way that their ballot initiative is its ongoing funding. It wasn't just to build the facility. What they're going to be able to do is for 20 years now, the money that comes from the tax dollars is going to be used to kind of fill the holes of what is in our current system. And you know, one of the reasons why I'm active at the state is it would be so nice if we get paid for what is good care, like the things we actually need to help people get better, if we were reimbursed for that. But the reality is there's a lot of big gaps. An easy example would be a lot of our substance use treatment. There's so many kind of rules as to when you can see people, what their, certain things that they have or don't have. And, in this age of an opiate epidemic, you have a couple of the main, Arapahoe House down outside Denver, they're the biggest substance use disorder provider in the state, can't keep their doors open because they can't afford it. And that's really unfortunate. This is not the time when we should be not able to provide these services. So, but my point here is that there's more to it than just the money. Like, it has to be, you have to get reimbursed for the right things, and that's kind of the ongoing goal of mine, to be active in the state. But in order to make programs like this sustainable, the one they're doing in Larimer County, the only way they can really stand this whole facility up is that those county dollars will be used. Basically, okay, Medicaid or whatever insurance doesn't pay for it, we, the county, Larimer, is gonna pay for it. So, they're like the hole plugger. They're going to make this a financially viable project because of that money, because there aren't the strings attached. And, I think, the rest of us are kind of left to try to do whatever we can and be creative with the current structure of Medicaid and various grants that we get. But there's a lot of strings attached. And it doesn't always make sense, and it doesn't always follow along with what's good patient care. So, I don't know, even if we get it on the ballot, and I haven't been involved in these conversations lately, but like, even if we get it on the ballot, it's gonna be more than just, here's some money to build this building. Like, we need the infrastructure for human resources and for kind of filling in the gaps of what makes it hard to stand these things up. And I'll just add, one of the things Mental Health Partners is doing right now, in part because of a very large grant we got to stand up what's called an urgent psychiatric center. So what we're trying to do is, currently we have a walk-in clinic, a crisis clinic, but we would really like people to be able to kind of come in a little bit more in an organized way, but very last minute. Say, for example, the police encounter someone in the community that's not doing well, 11 p.m. at night. Hey, I know I can see Dr. Ice at 7 in the morning, like she's gonna have an appointment. So we're trying to develop a program that does that, maybe some urgent case management, a lot of, development of our substance use programs, which are very much needed. So, we're in the process right now. We've kind of got those things in bits and pieces throughout our organization. We have many sites, but we're trying to just get one big central location to house all those things. And it'll be easier to staff if it's one building. It should hopefully be more seamless transitions of care. So that's kind of what we're working on right now. And that's one of the big pieces that we are playing in terms of the behavioral health roadmap. Someone asked a question about that. We'll, talk more about that. I did check at the break. It's online now. The final. It crashed my phone, so it's huge. But the Boulder County Behavioral Health Roadmap is it's a nice document online now. It kind of just outlines the work that's been going on for the last couple of years. Like needs assessment and how we're going to get all of these, agencies together and on the same page. A lot of work needs to be done. A lot of people have different ideas about how things should be done, but I think it just speaks to how much Boulder County values this. So, they had a lot of stakeholders or interest groups, people with lived experience, ability to contribute to that, and I think that's just going to keep. You're going to hear a lot about that, so I'm sure there'll be opportunities for you to be involved in that as well.
Anything else on
Oh, there are other things, but I don't want to.
Why don't you take one, Mark?
Okay, here's one about schools. Have the schools been doing anything more and different than before the pandemic? And might more kids be reached if the schools had more programs for mental health as part of the curriculum? Well, my answer is going to be yes, more would be better. I told you that I worked for Rise Against Suicide, so we provide 8 free sessions of suicide prevention therapy. Now, we give an assessment. Sometimes the assessment is that the risk is high, sometimes it's low. But right now, Boulder Valley is supporting that initiative, that program a lot more robustly than St. Vrain School District. Right now, we're having some problem with St. Vrain wanting therapists to prove medical necessity for the kids. And so that's becoming an obstacle. And we recently got an email saying that they wanted us to have permission slips, which really kind of go against kids wanting to have therapy on their own without their parents getting involved. So we have to work this out. When it comes to Boulder Valley School District, it's been very, I think, wonderful to see all the different ways that they want to incorporate mental health and behavioral health services with kids at all levels. And they have special education programs that also identify having some counseling, having some accommodations for times, when there are neurodivergent needs for them to be in their own room taking a test, things like that. So I think it's coming, but I think there's also the Screenagers movie's coming up, and I would recommend that everybody see that. I think it's the date November 8th.
The 6th.
November 6th, and it'll be at Douglas Elementary School. Please go see it. It's a wonderful movie about how to help youth and teenagers and mental health concerns.
Can I just mention one thing that BBSD is doing, and that is in the impact on education. It has funded wellness centers in 6 of the high schools, and a wellness center is not a counseling center. It is a place, at least it was last year. I have not totally figured this one out, but it's a place where a student can go when they need some time to be quiet. If they're anxious, they are excused from their class. They're watching it to make sure that a student doesn't use it all the time. But last year, I know at Monarch High School, the guy that I knew who was the person in that center said that he had, like 3,000 visits of kids coming there as different than going to the counseling office. They don't have to make an appointment. They just need to come in, say what's going on. They can sit quietly. They can talk to someone, and then they're excused to go back to class, and it's excused. So know that that's happening in 6 of the schools, funded by Impact, at least for this year.
Thank you.
Just thought I'd have that.
Karen, do you want to take another one?
I'll take, yeah, there's such great questions on here, and they're questions I could talk a lot about, so I'm trying to be, a couple, honestly, I have no idea, I don't know how to answer it. Well anyway, so what keeps you hopeful? I think this is a good, it's, not just a question for me, but a question for all of us. There's a lot to be overwhelmed by. I think, again, just by virtue of you being in the room, you care about this topic. I think for me personally, if there's a mess, I'd rather be in it and trying to fix it than watching other people try to fix it or be complaining about how it's a mess, So I've always been motivated by problem solving, big challenges. I think people that are more wired that way, like there's a lot of us in mental health, and it's needed because, fundamentally, little changes here and there are not what's going to be the change that we need in mental health. So I think, in reality, there are days when I feel very frustrated, I feel very overwhelmed. It's like, how are we ever gonna do this? Get very, just down. But those days aren't often. I'll say that I learned early on in this type of career from a mentor of mine that the way you sustain yourself is focusing on working with the people that are like on board and on the same page as you. Don't focus yourself on changing the minds of people that are against you or don't believe in what you're doing. So find your allies and work with those people. And I think that's really been helpful. Similarly, a lot of these big picture things that I'm talking about, there's a lot that I can't change, but there is a lot that I can, and I really try to focus, kind of like the serenity prayer, focus on the things you can control. And I do think, in doing this work, and kind of my endurance sports background of, wow, I couldn't believe I could do that, can I do more? It's like, in doing this work, I realize there actually is more that I can control than I think. And you don't really get that understanding until you put yourself out there. And then lastly, I'll say, I've got some really good colleagues. Most of them don't live here, but psychiatrists that do the same work, that are, we're all up against the same big challenges. And I think to have people that you're close to that really believe in what you do, it keeps you going, especially on the days when you can get demoralized, to know you have friends out there that are trying to accomplish some of the same things. It's always a ray of energy. We have there's a few of us, we have a WhatsApp thing, and we text probably daily. The group of us. And when I mentor people kind of coming into, especially community psychiatry, I talk about how important it is to have other people, that you surround yourself with that are into this. So, for this group, surround yourself with get to know each other and work with each other.
Thanks for being in there.
My pleasure, my pleasure. And it really does make me happy. And I think, this is a faith-based group. I think a lot of what all faiths are kind of beliefs that there are things bigger than yourself in this world, and that's what makes people passionate and do a lot of the things that we all do. And to have a higher purpose, passion, like that's also what helps you sustain yourself, like when you're kind of swimming against the tide. So, yeah.
Let's ask both Mark and Liz, what not just keeps you hopeful, but what kind of hopeful results are you seeing with your clients?
Well, like you, one of the things that gives me hope is really just people being here, people coming out on a cold, snowy day in Boulder and caring about these issues, in the activist work that I do, just seeing people show up again and again and again. After the murder of George Floyd, seeing people who were terrified of the COVID, call it the COVID now. I don't know why I just call it
That virus.
But going out and marching. And one of the gifts of COVID for me was all of these online communities that I have all over the world, where we're all coming together to do this work and do this healing work. And then, if you look at the world too, and you see, I think there's flooding in Texas right now, people don't ask, what's your political affiliation? What religion are you? They just come out and help. That gives me hope. When we see things happen in communities, when the shooting happened here, and just looking at how many people came out, what an outpouring there was, that gives me a lot of hope. And, excuse me, there's also something called trauma resilience that gives me a lot of hope. David Grand, who created Brain Spotting, did a documentary in 2009 called Come Hell or High Water, and a bunch of survivors from 9/11 went with him down to Louisiana, to people who had just been through Katrina, and really helping them have resilience through the loss of everything. And there's a man standing in front of his property, his house is in shambles, and he says, now I get to see what I'm made of. And there's something about that that gives me hope. I really feel that the human spirit is so strong. And if we can just live that and also help it to come about in each other, there's nothing that we can't do.
So the way I'm going to answer this question is, I live in Louisville, and when the Marshall Fire occurred, I was at my office in Longmont, so I didn't have a chance to evacuate. I was never in town, and I had to find a place to stay with a relative and watch the news. And when I went to bed, the news crew was just a block away from my house, and I was thinking it was going to burn down. I got home and got the good news that it was spared, but I started working with families that did lose their homes or had to be evacuated for a long time while their homes were, worked on because of the smoke damage and so forth. So my hope comes from watching these folks deal with a deep amount of grief and loss and sense of where do we go, and finding the community come together. And one particular day, I was at my office in Longmont, so I didn't have a chance to evacuate. I was never in town, and I had to find a place to stay with a relative. And I went to bed. The news crew was just a block away from my house, and I was thinking it was going to burn down. I got home and got the good news that it was spared, but I started working with families that did lose their homes or had to be evacuated for a long time while their homes were, worked on because of the smoke damage and so forth. So my hope comes from watching these folks deal with a deep amount of grief and loss and sense of where do we go, and finding the community come together. And one particular day I looked out my office window, and out in the parking lot they had all kinds of donations for people and for their animals and for their little kids, and they had all kinds of just free stuff out there in the parking lot. And I had several families that came in and they expressed feeling brain trauma. They said, I have trauma brain. And they couldn't remember stuff, and they couldn't think very well. They were making zombie decisions in their lives. They just didn't know how to, make the next choice. And thankfully, I got to help with that and watch other people come together and help them. And now I see them thriving. Many of them have rebuilt their homes. Some of them are still in the process of it. Some of them are still hassling with insurance companies, but they're doing it with, a sense that there's going to be a good outcome. And I found our community came together in Louisville, and I was really in a lot of doubt when it first. It looked like our town had been bombed. It was really, really bad. So we've come back. It'll be, the second year anniversary coming up in December. And so that's my analogy. I find that people are resilient, and I don't want to ever forget that. And I hope that I can be a source of that resilience.
3 people, 1 minute each. What is the one thing you'd like to say you didn't get to say?
I'll lose a minute just thinking about it.
Maybe you've said everything.
I guess what I would say is, stay hopeful, and if you see somebody that has, some distress or feeling like they're they're not able to control what's happening, and they need some help, lend an ear. And then if you can offer a resource or tell them where to go, please remember that you can help them. And you never know, when you stop to talk to someone, what impact you have on them.
I have a final short little practice, but do you have something?
Yeah, I mean, I think mine was kind of along the lines of yours a little bit, which, you know, I'm guessing they're friends, family members that are affected by, maybe individuals in this room affected by mental illness. And just speak to kind of that group and, you know, just to keep advocating and keep loving your family members, your friends. You know, there is a lot of help out there. I'm glad we're having more discussion about this. I'm glad people are starting to realize how important mental health is and how much we do need to talk about it. And you're not alone. And I'm glad that groups like INMI exist to show how you're not alone. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, you know, I think my final thought is around compassion. I actually had a whole piece kind of around empathic distress versus compassion. But I think the bottom line is that we can really practice compassion, and not only does that help us feel better internally for ourselves, but I think it helps us show up in the ways that Karen's talking, Mark's talking about. And so there are 3 elements to compassion, and I got this from Tara Brock. And the first one is it's embodied. And so you might imagine yourself as a tree, kind of rooted and grounded, and that's that embodied sense, because without that, we can kind of get flown around by experiencing the suffering of the world and the challenges that are happening. And then it's also active. Compassion is active, and so you might imagine the branches and how they sway and they move as that kind of activity of compassion, because compassion really is that sense of wanting to help, wanting to do something about the challenges of the world. And then it's also all-inclusive, and that's that canopy of the trees. And so not only for me, but for you and for all of our communities and all of us, just that inclusivity. And I know for me, the more I can practice what I need to do for myself, the more then that comes out and it helps me with that resilience when I'm struggling with either my physiology being off or something that feels overwhelming. And so just offer that to all of you.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
what a privilege.
Yes. No, I was going to say what you were going to say.
Okay. We made mine too. That's great. And Marty's good at that. So what there is to say is that there is still coffee. There are still cookies. The panelists have agreed to, there were some questions we could not get to today that you offered, and this would be your chance to kind of to get that question answered if you like. And just to have a chance to be here until about 10 of 4, okay? Would be great.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank
And
you.
I'd just like to make one special thank you for Diane Huggett and Barry, who made sure that the coffee table made this set all work, and the flowers and the cookies. All right, so.
Thank you.